Hello, I'm Daniela. In today's video, I'm going to show how I slow stitch an old school composition page. You know, like a piece of loose leaf or notebook paper, when they used to use that at schools. These are the lines that are blue that you practice your penmanship on, and they've got the little pink margins. I show you how I make it out of fabric and stitches. And from there, well, the possibilities are endless. You can add grocery lists or to-do lists or anything for your slow stitching to make it look a little vintage and really personal. So let's get started. So here's this adorable stitched piece of fabric that looks like notebook paper. And I think it offers a lot of possibilities. You can even stitch text. You can add different things to it. I just think it's so precious. I wanted to show you how I do it. So I used 2 layers of fabric here. I just doubled up the muslin here that I used for the background. It gives me a little more stability. You could of course put this in an embroidery hoop if you want. The hardest part of this is really the prep. So to start that, I have this little white piece of fabric that I'm going to use, but I'm not going to use all of it. I'm going to start with it whole, but then I'll cut it down afterwards. And then I have a little piece of muslin on the back, just to give it a little more stability. So as I mentioned, the hardest part of this is actually creating those lines, doing your prep work. To do that, I need to create the size page that I want. To make that easy on myself, I use a 3x5 index card because I can get that nice angle that I need to create my piece. So I'll just outline the card here, and I'll start at the top, and I'm going to make my finished piece the width of the index card. But I won't go down all the way. I'll just match up the lines on the other side here, and that will be the size of my finished notebook page. So this is very helpful for me to get started. Now from here, I have my block. It doesn't matter if it's centered on the fabric or not. From here, I'm going to take my ruler and I'm going to mark those lines that you'd rest your penmanship on. I'm going to start by making sure that my ruler is at 0 on the bottom, and I know up top I need a larger margin. So on the bottom, I'm just going to have my little lines every centimeter. And when I get to the top, I'll leave a good size gap. So here I'll put it at 7, and I have a nice size gap for the top. And then I just come over to the other side and I make those marks as well. So I have my 1, 2, and so on, all the way up to 7. And now from here, I'll just combine those marks. And these are my stitch guides. So those are my stitch guides that I'll stitch those blue stitches. But now I also need a margin. The margin is a little bit inside the piece, and I have a little bit of room here to play with it. I'm going to make my margin 1.5 inches. And you can make 2 margins if you want. I'm going to stick with just 1 right now, and then I'll make that line. So it's already starting to look just like a little notebook page. I'll put my backing fabric behind it, and I'm not going to stitch the outline of my page, so the backing fabric doesn't have to be exact. Then I have my 2 colors of embroidery floss that I'm going to use. I have 167 in Iris, the pink, and then I have 964 in this light teal, and that's the color I'm going to use for the lines. I'm not going to use all 6 strands of floss. This is a smaller piece, so I don't want the bulk of all 6 strands. So to do that, I'm just going to take my embroidery floss, and I'm going to use 2 strands of this blue. So I'll just pull it out the length that I'm going to need, which I usually try and go a little under 2 feet. I just pull the thread neat, just a couple times, and then with my hand, I just leave a little gap for the top of the thread to stick through, and then I tap it a couple of times. Now from here, that separates the threads. So I'll take one thread and gently pull it up while still keeping it cinched in my thumb and forefinger, and it pulls out very nicely. Again, I'll stretch it out, tap it a couple more times, and I have my second thread that I need. And I just pull that up. It comes out beautifully. It doesn't snarl up. And now I'll set this aside to use in the future. I have my 2 strands here. I'm going to hold them close together, pull them straight so there are no knots, and then I'm going to thread my needle. And now I'm ready to start. For my pink thread though, I'm going to use 4 strands because I want that to be a little more pronounced, that margin. But the pink I'm going to use later. So now I have my needles threaded with my thread. I'm going to just take some pins and hold that backing fabric in place. I'll do one up top and one at the bottom. So now I have to decide what type of stitch to use to make these lines. You can use a back stitch and that makes a beautiful stitch. I think I'm just going to use a straight stitch. I'm just going to make little lines with a little gap between them. I'm just going to create a little stitch holding both the backing fabric and my fabric in place, and then just stitch across. I'm working to keep it neat so my stitches don't really veer off that line. If they do a little bit, I can either replace the stitch by removing it and going back in, or I can just let it be. It's a little wonky and that's okay. This is a hand stitch piece. But if you're somebody who does not like wonky, then remove the stitch and start again. So I'm going to continue stitching, trying to make all my stitches approximately the same length with the same space in between them. And I'm going to stitch all of these lines with this blue thread. You can stitch the perimeter if you want. I'm not going to stitch the perimeter. I kind of like the raw edge of the fabric. And then we'll start stitching our margin. So I've stitched all my blue stitches to create the lines going across the page. And now I'm ready to stitch that margin. I have my 4 strands of embroidery floss here in that pink. And I'm going to stitch a back stitch. I like to start from the bottom. Before I start though, I wanted to show you the back, and this is how the stitching looks. So you can just see all the stitches and then where I change thread. So I'll start at the bottom here, and I like to start up just a little bit. And I create my first back stitch, going right to that line that we stitched with the blue. And then I just continue stitching. Now I like the back stitch. It gives a little more substantial stitch. I'm going to stitch right next to that stitch that I first put down. So it creates more of a straight line, or at least a line without the gaps. I want to make sure that I come up and then go down right next to where I put it in. And I can remove that pin. And I'll do this the length of this margin. Again, I want to make sure I really take the time to stitch on that line. I just think the result is really adorable. So now I've stitched that line, and you can see the 4-strand thickness of the pink is a little different than the 2 strands for those blue lines. Now on the back, I'm just going to come back. Oop, I can see I messed up here. Just pull that thread. And I'll just knot the thread over here. And now I'll take a hot iron and remove all my pen marks. So while my iron is heating up, I have this little gap of thread. I can either go back in and pull all of the thread to that tension, or I'm just going to twist it, and then I'll just feed it through and tuck it under so it doesn't get caught on anything. Kind of making an additional knot here. Just like that. One of the comments that I heard with using the Frixian pen is that sometimes the lines will come back after you take an iron over them to erase them. I haven't noticed that, but I did try it out to see if I could recreate that. And if I didn't let the iron sit enough and long enough on the piece, if the iron wasn't hot enough, I could make the lines somewhat come back. So I want to make sure that I get my iron nice and hot before I use it. So then I can just take the iron and go over my piece, removing all those lines that I made. Give it a little extra to make sure I remove all that ink. And so there I have my little notebook page. From here I can just cut around, being careful not to cut through any of the stitches. And I have that adorable notebook page. Here's the one that I showed earlier, using 2 strands and a little bit of an off-white muslin. You can see the difference the white versus the off-white makes. And I also wanted to show you another version using darker blue and red thread. So I just think there are really a lot of possibilities now with these little stitched notebook papers. I can stitch a to-do list, can list names, oh, even a menu. It's adorable. So that's how I slow stitch my old school notebook paper. You can make it large or small. You can make it life size if you wanted. I just think it's a cute little touch that offers a lot of possibilities. You can even add a Christmas list on it for your Christmas stitching. It's just really a cute little element that really makes the paper come to life, and it's a little comforting too, at least for those of us of a certain generation that use that paper. If you found this video helpful, please give it a thumbs up and be sure to subscribe. Thanks for joining me today.